Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 135 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Future Gavin, because this is Gavin after we recorded the episode. It is just Fia and I today. And because it's an episode that ends in 0 or 5, I am primarily not the information bringer for this episode. Fia got to tell us about something really cool. Unfortunately, both of us had some audio issues, so on my end, my recording software decided to record from not my nice mic that you're hearing me from now. Instead, it recorded me on my crappy webcam mic. So, my fault for not checking, but still unfortunate either way. And Fia, her air conditioner sort of kicked on here and there in order to edit that in a way that's not super obnoxious. Her audio just sounds kind of weird. So, unfortunately, the quality of the audio is not the best for this episode. However, the quality of the content, I think, it was really good. I really enjoyed this episode. I'm a bit of a policy nerd when it comes to, like, the laws and regulations and things about land preservation, which is what Fia is telling us about today. So, I was really interested and thought it was a really great conversation. Hopefully, you think so as well. So, with all that out of the way, here's the episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 135 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Gavin. That is Fia. Mike is off this week. Perhaps he'll tell the story of some recent events in his life that, as a partial excuse for why he's not here today. Not the whole excuse, but maybe that'll be a feature for next episode. But
a
for
mini
today,
episode.
it is. Yeah, yeah. That'll, instead of Today in History, that'll be his segment for the episodes, telling his war story from work.
Yeah.
Anywho, today it is just Fia and I, and I'm real excited because it's an episode that ends in 5, which means I don't have to do all that much work today.
Yeah.
Because it is a Fia Takes the Wheel episode. So Fia's going to tell us something real cool about sort of her world in the marine ecology. But yeah, I'm real excited because any week where I don't have to do work is a good week of the podcast.
That's not that many episodes.
It's it is 20% of our episodes these days.
Right.
Episodes that end in 5 or episodes that end in 0 are not my job.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Fia's going to be telling us about something cool. But before we get into that, Fia insisted that she be the one who does the housekeeping. I offered to do the housekeeping, but she said no, it is hers.
This is my job. This is my job. Every week I do this job, and so here I am again, folks, to tell you to rate the show on whatever platform you listen to us on, and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube to give us feedback about the show and any future topics you would like to hear on the pod. Also, if you'd like to be a guest on the show, which we are always looking for guests, please fill out the guest form, which all that stuff can be found in the show notes. And with that, Gavin, do you know what next episode topic is going to be?
You know, this week I really did take the not doing work.
Yeah, I was going to say, you barely had your
the podcast
Gavin corner.
Very, very seriously. As I was just talking to Fia before we started recording, I'm sort of a bachelor for this about 2 weeks. My wife is off visiting her family in California for one of her cousin's weddings. And so I've been busy just doing stuff around the house. You know, as one of the relatively few people in my age bracket to be a homeowner, guys, it's a little overrated.
Yeah.
I've mowed my lawn every day for the past, 4 days.
You need to switch to clover.
You know, I really should. I feel like we should fence our yard before that, though, so it doesn't just creep into our neighbor's yard as much. But, yeah, digression big time here. We bought a lawnmower, just a push mower. So we have, a little over half an acre. And so we bought a push mower off Facebook Marketplace because it was $40. And I was like, I need some exercise. Half an acre seems like a lot, and it'll seem like a lot while I'm doing it, but it'll be good for me. It ran for half an hour and then it died. It would not turn back
Oh, yikes.
on. But I was like, it's $40, whatever. So then we went out and bought. I was like, I don't want to have to deal with, especially with how long winters can be around here. I was like, I don't want to have to deal with a motor, so we bought an electric one. And man, we should have got some extra batteries. It runs out so quickly.
Oh. So can you even do
So I did.
like the whole thing?
No,
Yeah.
no. And we also weeks ago had a big storm that knocked down a couple really big tree branches from one of our trees in our yard, like big enough that I need like a chainsaw to sort of cut them up.
Wow.
Yeah. And so there's just a couple areas of the lawn that are just kind of inaccessible. So the grass is like 8 inches long there. Thank God I don't have an HOA or something.
Yeah.
Anywho, big digression. But yes, among other reasons, that is why I don't know what we're talking about next episode. But I assure you, it'll be something interesting.
Cool.
But
you do have a Gavin corner?
Yes, we have. I looked in the notes for this episode, just peeked at the beginning, and underneath the housekeeping, it just has a bullet that says Gavin Corner. And so we're going to be talking about a little bit of paleontology news from about a week ago, from Science Daily, and it's sort of written up by the University of Birmingham in England, and it is titled 3D Mouth of Ancient Jawless Fish Suggests They Were Filter Feeders, Not Scavengers or Hunters. So, long story short, there's some new fossils that were studied from this research. And I believe a new species was named from it as well. But these fossils are from the Devonian period, around a little less than 400 million years ago or so. But it's of a new jawless fish. So these are fish like hagfish and lampreys are really the only ones we have around today. But they're called jawless because they basically look like, picture like most of an eel, but then the front is not like a moray eel, like where it has like sort of the snappy jaws. It's basically just like the opening of a sock.
Yep.
It's just kind of a hole.
Yeah.
And in the case of mostly lampreys, I think hagfish might have some of the toothy bits, but definitely lampreys because they take chunks out of other things mostly. But they have not quite teeth because they're made out of keratin, but like little horns that they use to grab stuff. Some of the freshwater lampreys are parasitic. They'll latch onto bigger fish and basically take chunks out of them or suck their blood, kind of like a big leech. And then hagfish live in the very, very deep oceans. And so they must have some kind of toothy bit because what they'll do is feed on like dead whales or dead fish that fall all the way down to the bottom. And they'll just like rip chunks off of them. So for the most part, these days, the two groups of jawless fish that we have are scavengers. Some species of lampreys, I think, are like somewhat predatory. But I believe as juveniles, at least the lampreys, I don't think we understand all that much about juvenile hagfish because they live so deep. But lampreys, they're filter feeders, some of them, when they're young. And based on some of these fossils, that's kind of what it seems like their ancestors were doing, was not doing the parasitism thing, not hunting or scavenging, but we're doing filter feeding. So that's just kind of an interesting thing because this is, like I said, a very small selection of animals we have today.
Yeah.
And some of the earliest vertebrates, period. One of the main steps in the history of vertebrate life was the evolution of the jaw. So these are some of like they're very, very loosely representative of some of the earliest vertebrates, potentially. There's a lot of debate around that. There's been a lot of time of evolution happening between then and now for them to change, so how representative they are of the first vertebrates is very up for debate. But it's sort of pointing at maybe their larvae might be more representative than the adult forms to look at if we're trying to understand the evolution of vertebrates more generally. But yeah, so neat news.
That's cool.
At least for me, who likes long-term evolution things.
Yeah.
And threw a little marine stuff in there as well. But yeah, so I'll have a link to that news in the show notes for this episode if I hopefully remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, with that, Gavin Corner is done. I'm ready to not do work for the rest of this episode.
All right. Well, I am going to ask you a question. So
tell us about, as you told me not to call it, it's not NCAP.
No.
Or NCAP.
It's NCAP.
NCAP.
Yes.
NCAP.
So NCAP is an acronym that stands for the Nature Coast Aquatic Preserve. And yeah, we just call it NCAP for short. So I just want to ask you first really quick, Gavin, what is an aquatic preserve?
Oh, okay. It's sort of like the water version of like a national forest or a national grassland, something to that effect. Maybe not quite by the federal government like those are, but some kind of area in the water dedicated to where it's like you can't do like mining, that you can't really do. I mean, I'm sure there are like permits and stuff you can get for like fishing, but much less of that than non-preserve areas.
Cool.
Final answer.
Nice. You're very, very close, I would say, until the very end. There is no restrictions on like fishing other than regular general fishing limits like that the state has, so it's still like that. But yeah, an aquatic preserve, it's it's basically like a state park, but yeah, it's kind of the in-between of a marine protected area and a land protected area, so it's a combination of land and water.
Maybe marine protected area is kind of what I was thinking of.
It is. Yep. Okay. Yep. Marine protected areas are usually more strict, and they have like, they can have no take zones, but they don't always have to have no take zones or restricted areas. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, so aquatic preserves are kind of like this in between where there's some land, it gets submerged sometimes, and also there's parts where it's just mostly coastal. And so yeah, the purpose of aquatic preserves is to preserve it for future generations, and this is usually owned and maintained by the state.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are there like non-marine ones? Because with it saying aquatic, to me that kind of leaves it a little ambiguous.
I don't have an answer.
I don't know where there would be. I was gonna say I don't know where there would be a large enough freshwater area.
I mean, there's another aquatic preserve next to this one called the St. Martin's Marsh Aquatic Preserve, and that is brackish. Okay. So I mean, and the Nature Coast is often brackish too. So I wouldn't say there probably aren't any fully fresh aquatic preserves, because they would probably just get filtered into like a state park.
Gotcha.
You know?
That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. NCAP is what I will refer to it as. Again, it's the Nature Coast Aquatic Preserve. This is an aquatic preserve in Florida that was created in 2020. Which is very new. Wow. It is the 42nd aquatic preserve in Florida. We have quite a lot. It's pretty much the entire coastline.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah. It's just like one after another after another. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And it was the newest aquatic preserve in Florida in the last 32 years. So there hasn't been another one in 32 years. Yeah. And so the Nature Coast Aquatic Preserve is about 800 square miles of coastline, and it includes 625 miles of shoreline these are going to be in the Citrus, Hernando, and Pasco counties. So those are all Gulf side, and they're probably about an hour north of Tampa.
Okay.
So if you think
So
about
like
Florida,
not quite up to the panhandle, but
no,
getting there.
yeah, you're getting towards the armpit, but like you're more like at the rib cage of Florida.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah,
So what was this before 2020 then? Was it still like owned by the state or?
um, it just was nothing.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, I would assume it's probably owned by the state, but it's mostly like mangrove shoreline. It's not really
mm.
construct. I shouldn't
So
say
it's
that.
not like
Well,
nice like the Florida beaches you're picturing in your brain.
no, no. There's yeah, no, it's mostly like mangrove keys, like little tiny mangrove island
Okay.
patches. And then wherever possible, it's just like hardened concrete and built up like mansions, multi-million dollar homes next to boat launches. Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah. Uh it is technically the second largest aquatic preserve in Florida. Uh, Off the top of my head, I feel like the Keys Aquatic Preserve is probably the largest, but I don't know. I'm gonna look it up.
And that would kind of make sense, especially just like surface area wise, because I'm sure that encompasses like a ton of water too. The
I was
Keys.
wrong, actually. The largest
Oh.
is the Big Bend Seagrass Aquatic Preserve.
Oh,
It,
and spoilers. Apparently, that's the one just to the north of it.
yep, that is the armpit.
Ah, okay. I guess that's why they call it Big Bend. Uh,
Yep, Big Bend.
the more you know.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I got a little ahead of my notes, but it's the NCAP is bordered to the north by Big Bend, and then weirdly within NCAP there is a small other aquatic preserve called the St. Martin's Marsh Aquatic Preserve. It's just kind of like this small little patch of land that or land coastal area that had already been pre-established as an aquatic preserve, but they wanted to create this larger aquatic preserve that would be right up against the border of Big Bend and all the way down to um, the Pinellas County Aquatic Preserve. So that's I think it's down by Tampa. So basically, they they said, well, we're just gonna go around the St. Martin's Marsh Aquatic Preserve because
Oh, okay.
we need to protect the area above it and below it, and there's
Sure.
too much in the middle to do anything about it. But it's very tiny in comparison, and it looks kind of funny on the map. Yeah, and so combined, these four aquatic reserves, the Big Bend, NCAP, St. Martin's Marsh, and Pinellas, they protect the largest continuous seagrass meadow in the Gulf of Mexico, as well
Oh
as
wow.
the largest spring-fed seagrass habitat in the world.
Ooh.
Yeah, so for those of you that don't know about Florida, Florida has a ton of groundwater openings into springs. And so it's essentially bare limestone bedrock that has openings where water from the aquifers come up and yeah, they kind of run downstream and into the oceans. And
Yeah.
they supply a lot of
Yeah.
nutrients and good stuff.
Yeah. Florida especially has a lot of what we in geology refer to as karst
Yes,
topography.
yes,
So
I
it's
saw that word.
basically all the rock down. Yes. All that rock down there is limestone, which means that it's really easily dissolved relative to something like granite or even like a sandstone,
Hmm.
which means it's very prone to having holes.
Yes.
Very notably in Florida, sinkholes.
Mm-hmm.
But even if they don't open up as a sinkhole, at the surface, they have all these holes running through them that lets the water flow through them pretty easily, which is, I'm assuming, where the spring that feeds all this seagrass comes from.
Yes. Yep. It's probably, there's like, I can only think of 5 off the top of my head, but I'm assuming there's more. Several springs that collectively probably end up in this area.
Cool.
But yeah, so...
Yeah, that must make the ecology here a little weird because that's typically freshwater.
We're going to get into that. It's...
Okay, awesome.
I mean, I don't know that it really has anything to do with the springs, but we're going to get into some interesting stuff.
Cool.
Yeah, so NCAP, this region includes mangrove islands, which we call mangrove keys. They're just little islands that are completely dominated by mangroves. Salt marshes, sponge beds, marine springs, which are cool. That's like in the ocean and there's just holes of fresh water coming up. Oyster reefs, and then also limestone hard bottom habitats, which what I study are the limestone hard bottom habitats and the seagrasses. And just to let you guys know. So basically, the geology, like Gavin said, of the karst limestone, or I don't know, I feel like I'm using this term wrong, but the geology and the springs are key influencers of the ecosystem and the wildlife habitat within NCAP, and some prime examples of like the organisms would be like sea turtles and manatees. Manatees are they're marine organisms, but they will travel up into freshwater springs in the winter time to keep warm and probably other things and feed.
Yeah, I think like every so often they also have to go back to freshwater to drink.
Yes, right. They do. Yeah, they need to drink too. Yeah. Yep.
A weird thing that I remember we did an episode about manatees a long time ago.
Yeah.
Because our friend Kate McAfee wanted us to do it. And yeah, that was one thing that I was very surprised by, where it's like every other proper marine mammal can just drink salt water.
Yeah.
Like seals are fine with it. Whales, obviously, they don't really have another choice.
Yeah.
But yeah, manatees just never quite figured that one out.
Yeah. Yeah. Manatees are strange. But anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a spot in NCAP, a town called Crystal River, and it is one of the largest manatee wintering spots in Florida, and that is encompassed within NCAP. So whenever we pass through there to go do field work, it's like signs upon signs of like, swim with the manatees, come see the manatees, manatee statues, manatees everything. Yeah. Yeah. So, back to the NCAP. NCAP, it encompasses and protects 400,000 acres, approximately, of seagrass. And seagrass, is my jam because it supports valuable working front industries like fisheries, seafood production, and ecotourism. And obviously with NCAP and the manatees, the ecotourism is pretty huge here. So yeah, a lot of things that you can find within NCAP for recreational activities include kayaking, boating, fishing, and scalloping. Scalloping is actually I think it's the only open scalloping fishery left in Florida, I think. There's like a specific, I think only a couple months where you can collect these bay scallops. Yeah. And I also just saw one yesterday when I was collecting seagrass. And it was
cool.
really cool because I never saw one in person before. And if you know what a scallop is, it's a bivalve, but it has these just a line on the outside of their shell of blue eyes. And so there's probably like 100 little blue eyes, and they're so cool to look at in person. And then also, when you scare them, they try to like swim away. Yeah.
Scallops, very famous. We've talked with them a number of times only because of the Facebook meme group Wild Green Memes for Ecological Fiends.
Yes. We love them.
The scallops having eyes is a very popular, very famous meme on that page.
Yeah.
But, and also, scallops are just fun, like from watching SpongeBob as a kid.
Yeah.
Where it's like scallops are just the birds in SpongeBob universe.
Yeah. Or when they find that baby scallop.
Yeah. Oh, what a good episode.
It was a good episode.
But yeah, the first time you see a scallop move, you kind of don't believe it.
Right.
Because it just looks like it shouldn't be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. It really shouldn't. Anyways. So now I want to talk about the management plan for this aquatic preserve. But to preface, the management plan is over 600 pages long, so I did not read the entirety of that. Otherwise, I would have gone insane.
Nor should you.
So you will get a very brief overview of the management plan, and this is like, I'll just keep going. So, the main goal of the NCAP plan is to, maintain, preserve the biological and scientific and aesthetic value for future generations, while also allowing access and improving access for activities, recreational activities like boating, fishing, birding, ecotourism, all that jazz. And so, how I said this was this was started in 2020, but it actually didn't get approved. The management plan didn't get approved until 2022. And so kind of how it was created is they had a bunch of stakeholders get together, researchers, scientists, government officials, local people in the ecotourism industry, people that live there, and kind of started with a draft of the management plan, brought it to the public for comments, then an advisory committee, and then kind of revised, I think, 2 times before they finalized it December 9th of 2022. So it's interesting to see.
And just as a quick thing, that might sound like a lot of steps. That's actually, having 2 revisions, that's remarkably streamlined.
Oh, yeah.
For anything like this.
Yeah.
When I was in grad school, I took a whole class about mostly federal government things about like nature preservation stuff, mostly obviously as it regards fossils. And man, doing any kind of nature preservation has so many hoops to jump through.
Yeah. Right.
So a rare Florida W, as the youths say.
Yes, Florida W. Yeah. So it took 2 years for this to establish, which is surprisingly pretty quick, I would say, for this kind of stuff to play. And with that, I want to get into monitoring programs, because with management comes monitoring. And this is where I come into play, and this is where my lab comes into play. So, the goal for the monitoring is to establish baseline data. This is a brand new Nature Coast Aquatic Preserve. We need to start somewhere. So, the main goals were to monitor the water and then also monitor the seagrass, because it's a huge stretch of seagrass beds. So, and this is technically it's for the DEP, but is done actually by my lab at UF. We're, hired as contractors, and we perform the monthly water quality station sampling, as well as the annual seagrass monitoring sampling, which is the annual seagrass is done in the summertime, but the water is done every month.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been on a handful of these water quality monitoring boat days, and it's really a lot of fun. You get to see a lot of nature and also, collect data for science, which is pretty cool to see that, my researchers and my team of, my lab is very hands-on and directly participating in the help of this aquatic preserve monitoring. And so, yeah, and then once we start seagrass monitoring in July, that'll also be where I'll be contributing to my lab. So that'll all go towards NCAP. And so all of this data,
That's
you're
awesome.
probably wondering, where does it go? The data is all entered into something called CCAR database, which I have a bunch of links throughout here that I'd like to link in the show notes afterwards, so you guys can see that. But yeah, all of the data gets entered in there, and it is completely public, so you can go there and look at the data right now if you'd like.
That's cool.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's is becoming a really big shift in science in general, is public availability and accessibility of data, where it hasn't always been the case. So I'm really excited that this NCAP region is something that we're contributing to that, better science, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and especially with, and a lot of science is, at least in part funded by, like, some form of government.
Yeah.
So especially in those cases, having like everything publicly available is just how things should be done, because it's like you paid for it with your tax money
Exactly.
in some form.
Right.
So it's like if you feel the need to go look at water quality information from 6 months ago, go nuts.
Right. Yeah, and I guess I forgot to mention that acronym that this NCAP is managed by the DEP, which is the Department of Environmental Protection. All states, I think, have something equivalent to that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I think here in Pennsylvania, it's like the DNR, Department of Natural Resources, or something to that effect.
There's also a department.
I should really know that, since we have at our university, that's some of our alumni now work there.
Yeah, you should. You should look into that.
I should know that.
There's also Department of Environmental Quality. What is it in New York? I think.
I think it's DEP.
Yeah, I think it's DEP too. Yeah, in Florida it's also DEP. Okay, yeah. So that is the monitoring part, and now I want to get into the habitat descriptions. And so this is a very unique region. Like I said, there's seagrass beds, salt marshes, mangrove keys. There's also sponge grounds. There's hard bottom habitats. There's macroalgae dominated areas too. It's a very, very diverse system. So yeah, the first one I'll start with the biggest one, which is seagrass. They provide many ecosystem services, like they stabilize the sediments, they can reduce shoreline erosion, they can also sequester carbon, which I find very interesting. It's almost like an underwater Amazon, essentially, where the Amazon is able to store a lot of carbon in the trees. The seagrass can sequester and store a lot of carbon in their roots.
Okay.
Yeah, and with the reduced sediment, or stabilizing the sediments, that also improves the water clarity. So it's very, very clear in this region. I think, we're able to see 15 to 20 feet deep at some times, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Especially considering how north in the Gulf we're at, because I mean, if you're thinking about like the armpit, like we're just at the rib cage, the Florida Keys and everywhere where it's like this aqua blue, crystal clear kind of thing. It's still,
Right.
it's well, it's like a 6 or 7 hour drive um, from this area. I don't know in miles because I just did the drive, so I
Sure.
know it's this drive.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that is another thing that makes it really unique here, is that the water quality is, the clarity is really remarkable. And so, yeah, seagrass, they also provide habitat for a lot of special, unique, and also economically valuable fish. So, speckled trout, there's also pufferfish, southern stingray, nurse sharks, bonnet heads, a lot of sea turtles, grunt. I could name a million things, but they're a habitat for a lot of them.
Yeah, that's something that I learned in the class I went to Belize for in undergrad, was like how important these coastal areas are for like nurseries of like the
Yes,
things that are like super characteristic of
exactly.
living out on the reefs.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, they don't live there their whole lives.
Nope.
The reefs can be kind of dangerous because that's also where a lot of the predators live.
Yeah.
Um,
There's like a large chunk of marine species that at some point rely on the coastal waters, whether it's seagrass meadows, mangroves, oyster reefs. At some point in their life cycle, like they're associated with them, which is cool.
yeah.
Yeah, so next we have salt marshes, which they serve as a transitional zone between the estuaries and the uplands. So it's basically, yeah, a brackish transitional zone where you get the salt marsh, you get marsh grass, and it protects a lot of the upland, or like just land, from saltwater intrusion, waves, storm surges, and then can also protect the estuaries by trapping pollutants that flow from the land into the waters of the coast.
So how is other than the salt, how is a salt marsh different than like just like a swamp?
Well, I would say that swamps are freshwater.
Okay.
I want to check this one.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so it says here that swamps are predominantly forested, while marshes have few, if any, trees.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. Because to me, like, I always, like, even though, like, my Louisiana talk was called Swamp Corner, I didn't
Yeah.
work in the swamps. I worked in the marshes because it was all predominantly salt marsh grass. It was just marsh grass, maybe a few
Okay.
shrubs, but like there weren't many trees at all.
Okay. That I guess that makes sense. Where
Yeah.
it's like the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of swamp is Shrek.
Yeah.
And he lives in a tree in
Right.
a swamp.
Right.
So I guess yeah, that makes sense. I guess. Good job, DreamWorks.
Yeah, good job, DreamWorks. um, yeah, so both the seagrass beds and the salt marshes serve as nurseries, which we talked about before for um, the juveniles of many marine species. Next, we have the mangrove keys, which include red and black mangrove species. And I was taught a cool little trick to identify the difference between red and black mangroves. So if you take your hand and curl it like you're holding like a ball, and you turn it so your fingertips are facing down, and you have your fingers spread open, this is a red mangrove. The red mangroves have roots that you can see above land, and they almost look like a trap. There's like roots that come down over the water like that. And then if you invert it and do a 180, you see this is what a black mangrove species can look like, because they have those little roots that shoot up and just stick out like little pencil tips next to the tree.
Okay. Yeah, the red mangrove is definitely what I think of.
It's more
for a
common.
mangrove.
Yeah, it's like the dominant species. Okay. Yeah. There's red, black, and then really rare is white, and I have no idea how to tell those.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, the mangrove keys are an important protective barrier between storm and wave energy. They can really reduce a ton of storm impact from the immediate coastline, and can also reduce the impacts of excessive nutrients like the salt marshes that can have a big impact on the water quality out in the coastal waters. Yeah, and so also cool. As a habitat, they are an important nesting ground for bird species, and they're big feeding sites too, because they're almost like sprinkled out away from the main like border of land. So it's like a bunch of sprinkles of little pockets of mangrove keys, and in between it's estuary water with seagrass beds, and that's with that crazy water clarity, the birds can no problem see the fish and have a nice dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also like relatively safe too, because like the biggest thing I think of with Florida is the alligators. But alligators really don't like salt water.
Yeah.
They
I have
don't
yet to
hang
see
out in salt water.
Right. I have yet to see one out in the Nature Coast Aquatic Preserve.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the last habitat I want to talk about, which it's a tricky thing to define. It's called hard bottom habitat. Hard bottom habitat is basically a catch-all for its bare limestone, but it could also be dominated by corals. It could be dominated by macroalgae. It could be dominated by sponges. It could be a mixture of all of them. It could have outcrops of rock that create ledges, and the topography and complexity of these hard bottom habitats is what makes it really difficult to define them and also try to compare them.
Right.
Because they can be so different. And so the hard bottoms that I see in these areas, and is one of the main focuses of my study, they're kind of in between the borders of the NCAP and then the St. Martin's Marsh Aquatic Preserve. So remember how I talked about that one that's kind of like engulfed inside the NCAP? The hard bottom area is one of the hard bottom areas is right on that border, and they're mostly flat bedrock with a bunch of sponges, pretty big loggerhead sponges. Those are basically, they call them tire sponges. They look like tires on the ground, like sideways. They're dark purple, and they have big pores in the center that kind of creates this like donut shape to them. Or tire shape. And then we don't have structural coral. We have encrusting coral. So we usually get like coral balls. They're just balls with like coral encrusting over them. And yeah, so I would say comparatively to like other literature, I would say that the structural complexity is lower than what other people are considering hard bottom habitat, because the other hard bottom habitats have these huge like ledges or rocks or kind of things that create height, whereas comparatively they're almost like in deep holes surrounded by seagrass. So you'll have seagrass beds for miles, and then you'll get to a patch of hard bottom and they're deeper. I think that probably can be attributed to the amount of sediment loss, and you're just like down to bare bones like limestone rock at that point. But yeah, it's really interesting because the further in you go towards like the mangrove keys in this NCAP SMAP, that's what we call the St. Martin's Aquatic Preserve, the further you go inland towards the mangroves, you start getting these patches of hard bottom, and then they get more prevalent, until you're just left with mangroves and land. And so it's interesting. There's almost like a gradient of these little patches, and then at the further out you go, it's dominated by seagrass beds. And so it's quite the picture, and I'm sure I did not do justice of explaining what it is, but we'll bring it around to some final fun facts of the NCAP. It has 14 boat ramps for state parks and 2 national wildlife refuges.
Interesting. I'm curious how all that works with like the state parks as well.
Right.
With it being like 2 different like state entities kind of stepping on each other a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think that like the NCAP is really more for the water. And so I don't know for sure, but it seems that most of the stuff that we do is past the part that you would consider a state park.
Okay.
Yeah, and then some archaeological resources. The NCAP area has been described as a hub of trade and cultural activities by indigenous people. So previously, before colonization, there were shell middens, ceremonial sites, and other types of historical and cultural sites that have been documented on islands within the NCAP. And some of these sites have been dated back 4,000 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so I guess one example, there's one place called Shell Mound, which it's essentially just a mangrove key that there's a crap ton of shells that got dumped there. I think it was used as like, they would harvest the meat inside of the shells and just put the shells back in this mound to put it back.
And then mangroves grew on top of it, basically?
Yeah, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's really cool to see because the shells are like still pretty intact, which is surprising.
Yeah, well, I guess if the roots of the mangrove are kind of keeping them there and keeping
right.
them from
and then you get sediment accumulation like over it. Yeah. It's like the only reason why you're able to see them now is because, or see them as well now is because of Hurricane Idalia came and removed some of that top sediment. So it's really prominent now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is NCAP, and thank you for listening to ramble on about this. I really love the NCAP region, and it is special to me, and I'm glad I got to share it with you guys. And with you, Gavin.
Yeah, of course. I'm always happy to hear. One of the things, like, I feel like most people, at least sort of in my line of work, are kind of like policy nerds, where it's like we really like getting into the minutia of like land use and how all the different laws and regulations and things, especially in paleontology, because we need to be very aware of all of these things.
Yeah.
From where we get our fossils from, and so that just kind of comes with the world of paleontology. But it's cool to hear the different sides of it from, modern biology.
Right. Yeah. And it's just like so refreshing, I think, to me, because like in my master's program, I was doing research, but it was always hard for me to grasp the broader impacts of what I was doing for, the environment and contributing to scientific research. Whereas, like, in this new position that I'm in, I'm actively doing some of this work that is implemented and put into policy, and now we're actively monitoring it, which is incredible and very rewarding.
I think that's I think that's one of the first big like existential crises you run into whenever you go into grad school.
Yeah.
Particularly in the sciences, is like why and for me it came from my advisor. He asked me, relatively early on when I was working on my project, he was like, explain to me why your project is important. Why should any money go toward what you're doing? Particularly in a place like South Dakota, where they don't even have state income tax.
Yeah.
And so that kind of gave me a little bit of an existential crisis. And that's especially
been there.
Especially in paleontology, because it's like, unless you're doing things with like paleoclimate, which is obviously very relevant, it's hard. I still, to this day, don't have a terrific answer for why my project was important. But I definitely get how satisfying that could be.
Yeah.
I don't know the experience myself.
Yeah.
No, that's not true. The work I did in California, out in the desert, did make me feel really good and really proud of what I was doing.
Right.
And I imagine that this feels roughly the same to you.
Definitely.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing.
Yep.
I'm very excited to hear more at various points about different land use things. I'll probably look up some stuff about it.
I want to do another episode about the SMAP, which I just found it after I did all the notes today, but it has a lot of paleontology and historical background on one of the websites I found, and yeah, it would be really, I think, interesting to you and maybe the fellow listeners.
Yeah, Florida has a very long history of paleontology.
Yeah.
Most of the resources I cited in my master's thesis came from people at University of Florida. Mm-hmm. Particularly on horses. They've done a lot of good horse stuff.
Yeah.
And I imagine some of those folks are even still there. Probably. But, yeah, so like I said, I'm going to be looking some stuff up after this. If you would like to do the same, dear listeners, there will be some links down below in the show notes, generously provided by Fia. But yeah, with that, I think that's going to wrap us up. So thank you for listening to this episode of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Gavin. That has been Fia. And we will see you all in 2 weeks. Until then, take care, everybody. This episode of I Wish You Were Dead was written by Fenella Campanino and hosted by Gavin Davidson, Mike Bryson, and Fenella Campanino. It was sound edited and edited for YouTube by Gavin Davidson. Special thanks to former guests of the pod and to listeners like you.